American families, including, of course, older adults. In 2022, frauds and scams cost Americans $9 billion, a 30% increase from just 1 year before. Older Americans lose more money to scams on average than younger adults. Last year, they reported losing more than $1.6 billion to fraud, though the actual losses can be as high as $48 billion. It has long been an Aging Committee priority to protect older adults from fraud and from scams. Today, we're releasing the committee's 8th annual fraud book. This critical resource captures the most common scams targeting older adults in 2022 and offers resources to protect against fraud. Here's the book, and here's the Spanish version of the book. And we're very proud of the work that goes into this, the staff work by members of the staff on both sides of the Aging Committee, both majority and minority staff. This year, the committee's work is, among other things, focused on exploring a new threat related to scams. Of course, that is what we know as AI, artificial intelligence. By now, we've all likely heard of what artificial intelligence is all about, and we've also heard of generative AI, a nascent, vast, and opaque tool that many Americans don't fully understand. And I would include in that the work that the Senate is doing. Individual members of the Senate, both parties, trying our best to understand artificial intelligence and especially generative artificial intelligence. So we're learning as well, and at the same time as the nation is learning. While we're working to understand the potential applications of AI, scammers have been integrating it into their schemes to make their ploys more lifelike and convincing. Deepfakes, or AI-developed images that look nearly identical to a real-life person, and voice clones can mimic the voice of a loved one and can easily dupe consumers and businesses into giving away valuable personal information or money. Any consumer of any age can fall victim to these highly convincing scams. In preparation for today's hearing, my staff spoke to numerous people around the country who were scammed or nearly scammed by these bad actors using AI. These stories are heartbreaking, with victim after victim expressing reactions of fear, despair, disbelief, and anger. One of our witnesses will share his story today, Gary Schildhorn. Gary is from Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia in the southeastern corner of our state. And Gary will talk about, despite knowing all the signs, talk about his situation of nearly losing $9,000 to a scammer after he heard a voice clone of his son on the other line pleading for help. So, Gary, I want to thank you for being here today and for telling your story. We'll also have a chance to hear from 6 other people today who are willing to share their stories. The following will appear in a video. Jennifer DeStefano from the state of Arizona, Amy Conley from the state of New York, Janice Creason from the state of Pennsylvania, Dauphin County, right in the middle of our state, and Terry and Elva Holsapple and their neighbor, Jake Rothermel from Potter County, Pennsylvania, way up on the northern border, the New York border of Pennsylvania. We'll share some of their experiences today, and more of their stories will be available on the Aging Committee's website. These stories are awfully hard to hear, and they're tragic. And I know that as a parent, I would feel the same fear and the same need to react or act if I heard the voice of one of my daughters or something that happened to them or my grandchildren on the other end of the phone begging for assistance. Any one of us would react in the ways that the testimony today will outline. So this is something we all have to be more aware of. So with that, we're grateful you're here today, but we'll play this video clip first, and then I'll turn to Ranking Member Braun.
And immediately heard, "Mom, I've been in an automobile accident. I've been in an accident."
Immediately, I heard sirens and my daughter's voice. And she said in a crying voice, "Mom, I got in an accident."
My daughter she was crying on the phone. I mean, profusely crying and saying, "Mom, mom, mom." And of course, my wife was saying, "Leanne, Leanne, what is the matter? Leanne, Leanne." And then she repeated it again, "Mom, mom, mom." And it sounded exactly like her.
So I answered the phone, and it was my 15-year-old daughter crying and sobbing, saying, "Mom, mom, mom, help me. These bad men have me. Help me, help me, help me."
Someone called posing as someone from law enforcement, the court system, I would say someone in the court system, and explaining to me what had happened, that my daughter had been charged, what the next steps were, and said that they could get her into a program that would ensure she did not get points on her record, that she would not be charged, and said there would be some cost involved to it.
The phone rang right away, and it was someone who said they were from the probation agency and that it would be $15,000 to get her out of jail.
It wasn't very long. A public defender called. She said she's going to be charged and she's going to go to jail. So she said, but you can post bail for her if you want to, and she won't go to jail. So we said, well, how much is the bail? And she said it's $15,000.
He started to demand $1 million. That wasn't possible. And then he got really angry with me about that. So then he came up with $50,000.
There was something subconscious about this incident that I believe resonated with them, that things were not all on the up and up.
But as I was ready to get in the car, actually to head to the bank and get out money to send with a courier, honestly, I just put my head down in the car and just said a prayer. Out of the blue, it was just like, it's a scam.
She sent a picture of herself at home, smiling, saying, "I'm fine." So at that point, I knew it was a scam.
Jake called us back. He found out all the information. I was on the phone with him, and Elba was on the phone with Leanne. And Jake said, it's a scam.
And then finally, the mom who was with my daughter, Aubrey, was able to get my husband on the phone, who was able to locate my older daughter, Bree. So I demanded that I talk to her to make sure that it was really her. And so I started asking her questions, and she's just, "Mom, I have no idea what's going on. I'm here with Dad." And at that point, then that's when I knew that this was a scam.
It's the worst feeling a parent can have.
It rattled us for sure.
I was devastated when I heard it. I was upset. I had tears.
I could hear her in the background pleading and crying and begging for my help. And then that's when I got really scared.
Scammers are going to basically play on one thing, and that is on the heartstrings of particularly family members, because when it comes to family, we'll do anything for our families.
Well, you heard it all there. That's what we're dealing with here, real people in real lives. Ranking Member Braun.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we just listened to there, it's going to get worse because we're at the leading edge of this technology, and it's always amazed me, and running a business for as long as I did, and when we embraced technology 15 to 20 years ago, and it became such an important part of running a profitable, efficient logistics and distribution business. But constantly, you've got folks out there through credit card scams, you name it, they are after everyone. And it amazes me how broad it is. Now you see what happened here. So I think the main takeaway is that AI obviously can be used for that. It also may be the tool that you can use against it. That's kind of the conundrum. We just need to figure it out. Private sector has been using AI, I think, beneficially for a long time, dates back into the 90s. It's important, I think, the government embraces the technology so it understands it, so that we can come up with some paradigm that is in place to help folks like we just listened to. I'm going to be introducing the Medicare Transaction Fraud Prevention Act, which will be very simply for all the fraud that comes around it, using the same tools credit card companies have used for a long time. And you've all been part of that, where somehow they get your credit card number. They do a great job at it. In most cases, the fraud does not occur. There's no reason we wouldn't want to minimally at least mimic that. It's going to target two particular areas: diagnostic testing and durable medical equipment. That's another way you can scam, and here you're involving the government, and these are generally expensive items, medically speaking. What this would do is notify beneficiaries in real time with suspicious activity. While some of my colleagues have called for a heavy-handed federal approach to AI, I'm very concerned that we don't smother it, because it's already out there. And the malfeasance is ahead of maybe the good results that can come from it. So I'm proud to be part of this hearing. It's very important that we keep this in the discussion mode. Be sure that we don't smother the technology, because it's already out there. And if we do not embrace it, we will not be able to counter the ill effects out there. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Braun. I'll start our witness introductions. I'll do 3, and then I'll turn to Ranking Member Braun for our 4th witness. Our first witness I mentioned in my opening, Gary Shieldhorn. And Gary, I want to thank you for being here, for telling your story. Gary is a lawyer in Philadelphia. He specializes in corporate law, including corporate fraud. He will share his experience with a bad actor, and that's a terrible understatement, who used his son's voice to try to scam him out of thousands of dollars, something no parent, no family member wants to endure. So Gary, thank you for being here with us today and for sharing your story. Our second witness is Tom Romanoff. Tom is the director of the technology project at the Bipartisan Policy Center. He's previously led IT initiatives at several federal agencies and explained the impact of new technology on government operations. He will discuss how AI is being used to make fraud and scams both more sophisticated and harder to detect. So, Mr. Romanoff, thank you for being with us today and bringing your expertise. Our third witness is Steve Weissman, a professor, attorney, and an expert in scams, identity theft, and cyber security. Mr. Weissman has dedicated his career to educating consumers on how to safeguard against fraud and scams. Thank you for being here and for sharing your expertise with us. I'll now turn to Ranking Member Braun.
My pleasure to introduce Dr. Tahir Eken. He is the field chair in business analytics and professor of information systems at Texas State University. His book, Statistics and Healthcare Fraud, How to Save Billions, covers fraud prevention strategy and many of the trends that will be discussed here today. Thank you for coming here to testify for us.
Thanks, Ranking Member Braun. We'll turn to our first witness, Gary Shieldhorn.
Thank you, Chairman Casey, Ranking Member Braun, for inviting me to this hearing. I hope my testimony is useful. As you mentioned, I'm a practicing attorney in Philadelphia, and I was the intended victim of a scam using my son's voice. And here's the story. I was on my way to work. My phone rang. It was my son. He was crying. He said, "Dad, I was in an accident. I hit another car being driven by a pregnant woman. My nose is broken. They arrested me. I'm in jail. They assigned a public defender to me. His name is Barry Goldstein. You need to call him. You have to get me out of here. Help me. I said, Brett, I'll call him and I'll call you right back. He said, you can't. They took my phone. Help me, Dad. I'm a father. I'm a lawyer. My son's in trouble. A pregnant woman was hurt. He's in jail. I'm in action mode. Before I could do anything, my phone rings again. It's Barry Goldstein. I just met with your son. He's hurt. He has a broken nose, but he'll be okay. He hit a car being driven by a pregnant woman. She was taken to the hospital. They arrested your son because he failed the breathalyzer test at the accident scene. I said, wait, my son would never drink and drive. He said, Brett told him that, but he had an energy drink that morning, and that may have caused the failed test. He said I should take some steps if I wanted to bail my son out. I said, of course I want to do that. He said, well, I'll give you the phone number for the courthouse, and here's your son's case number. You should call the courthouse and bail him out. I immediately called the courthouse. They answer correctly. I tell them why I'm calling. They said, what's your son's name? They asked for the case number. They said, yes, your son's here. Bail was set at $90,000. You need to post 10%, $9,000 to bail him out, but there's a problem. So what's the problem? The county bail bondsman was away on a family emergency, and he's not available. He said, but there is a solution. You can post what they called an attorney's bond. I said, I'm an attorney. He said, yes, but you haven't entered your appearance on behalf of your son. There's a Mr. Goldstein that did that. You should perhaps call him back and try to get him to post an attorney's bond. Hang up, I call Mr. Goldstein back. Mr. Goldstein, can you post the bond for my son? Yes. You need to wire me $9,000. He said, I'm a member of a credit union, so you need to take the cash to a certain kiosk, which will get the money to me. And I'm scheduled to leave for a conference in California. I'll be leaving to the airport in 2 hours, so you need to move quickly. I learned later that that kiosk was a Bitcoin kiosk that would convert the money to cryptocurrency. I hang up. All of these calls happened in 2 minutes. This is the first time I had a chance to think. I called my daughter-in-law and suggested that she call work and tell them that my son wasn't going to make it today because he was in an accident. A few minutes later, FaceTime call from my son. He's pointing to his nose. He goes, my nose is fine. I'm fine. You're being scammed. I sat there in my car. I was physically affected by that. It was shock and anger and relief. I decided that I would try to keep Mr. Goldstein engaged in the scam while I invited law enforcement to become involved. I contacted the Philadelphia police, and they said because I had not lost the money, they couldn't help me. I called the local FBI office. They said, look, there was burner phones and cryptocurrency. They were aware of the scam, and that they were unable to bring back cryptocurrency once it was out of the country or wherever it went. And so they were unwilling to get involved. And that left me fairly frustrated because I had been involved in consumer fraud cases in my career, and I almost fell for this. So the only thing I thought I could then do was to warn people. So I approached the Philadelphia Inquirer, and they did a feature story. And Fox News ran a segment on their morning show. The scam hasn't abated. Since that article came out, I've received 20 to 25 calls throughout the country of people who have been contacted by Barry Goldstein and who had lost money. And they were devastated. I mean, they're emotionally and physically hurt. They almost were calling to get a phone call hug because they were so upset. And they asked me, what could I recommend? And I said, look, do what I did, go public. And the other suggestion I had was to go to the bank where they bank and suggest that tellers inquire about anyone that's taking out a lot of cash that doesn't usually do that. That was the only thing I could come up with. The cryptocurrency and AI have provided a riskless avenue for fraudsters to take advantage of all of us. They have no risk of exposure. I know that there's economic benefit to cryptocurrency, but I also know that it causes substantial harm to society and financial harm. To me, it's fundamental if we're harmed by somebody, there's a remedy either through the legal system or through law enforcement. In this case, there is no remedy, and that fundamental basis is broken, and I hope that this committee could do something about that. Thank you.
Well, Gary, thanks very much for telling your story. It'll help us better be prepared in helping others. Mr. Romanoff, you may begin your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Casey and Ranking Member Braun, for having me today. It is an honor to be here, and thank you, Gary, for sharing your story with us today. I'm Tom Romanoff. I'm the director of the technology project at Bipartisan Policy Center, where we focus on bipartisan solutions for the technology sector. We started this work in 2019 when we formulated the AI National Strategy with Representatives Will Hurd and Robin Kelly. The strategy passed as 1250, House Resolution 1250, alongside 7 other bipartisan sponsors. Prior to my role at the Bipartisan Policy Center, as you mentioned, I advised C-suite executives on emerging technologies and policy, and included in my clients were the Office of Management and Budget, the FDA, General Services, among many others. There are a lot of questions about what this technology can do and what it cannot do, so I want to first level set about generative AI. First, we are speaking about a very specific type of AI. There are 6 other disciplines, all of which profoundly impact our world. We are seeing exponential growth across all of those disciplines and branches of AI. Second, many of the ideas we're discussing today predate AI's current use and current capacity. The use of AI to amplify these crimes is concerning, as we already know the challenges in stemming scams and frauds were difficult before the capability of AI was brought to bear. Third, last year, publicly available generative AI programs got so good that most people could not tell the difference between computer-generated content and human-generated content. With the recent capacity enhancements and this technology's availability, cybercriminals are increasingly adopting it. Generative AI specifically poses some questions because it has compounding effects beyond what we've seen to date. Number one, it makes it easier, cheaper, and faster for scammers to produce deceptive content. And number two, the increasing quality, quantity, and targeting capabilities lend a hand to fraud. It is critical to understand that while AI has numerous benefits, its misuse and scams is a growing concern. Adding to said concerns is that cybercrimes are on the rise. As you mentioned earlier, the Federal Trade Commission reported that a staggering steady increase of online fraud losses year over year has been increasing, with 2022 losses reaching around $9 billion. Addressing this challenge requires a multi-pronged approach, especially in the age of AI. We need to enhance synthetic media detection capabilities, ensure content verification, develop standards and response processes, and implement multiple authentication factors for users while addressing issues in the defense mechanisms themselves, such as bias and discrimination in the automation detection systems. On that last point, please don't make any mistake. The use of AI models with biased data to detect cyber fraud detection may have significant consequences. AI is just a model that uses data, and we never really figured out the data considerations, and so the AI models will have the same questions and concerns that we have around data use and decision-making that we've been asking ourselves for 20 years. If AI systems are fed garbage data, then they will produce garbage outcomes. In closing, the pace at which AI is being adopted and advancing is breathtaking. As we embrace its benefits, we must also be vigilant against its risks, especially cybercrimes. The recent executive order by President Biden emphasizing the management of synthetic content and labeling of verification of AI-generated media is a step in the right direction. However, more concentrated efforts are needed at both the federal and state levels, and the role of Congress cannot be understated. We must codify and standardize the undefined aspects of this technology in order to respond to the negative use cases. States will continue to forge ahead with their own laws and regulations, creating a patchwork of definitions, standards, and enforcement that could be further exploited by cybercriminals. It is often said that innovation is at the heart of progress, but it is critical that Congress works to strike a balance between innovation and regulation to safeguard our society, particularly our senior citizens, from the dark side of AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Romanoff. Mr. Weissman.
Chairman Casey, Ranking Member Braun, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today. My name is Steve Wiseman. I am a lawyer with the firm of Margolis, Bloom, and D'Agostino, a professor at Bentley University where I teach white-collar crime, author, and the editor of Scamicide.com, where each day I provide new information about the latest scams, identity theft, and cybersecurity developments and tips on how to avoid these problems. Scamicide was named by the New York Times as one of the 3 best sources for information about COVID-related scams. When it comes to fraud and scams affecting seniors, I'm here to tell you things aren't as bad as you think. Unfortunately, they are far worse. According to the FTC's Consumer Sentinel report, which was just released a few weeks ago, and you mentioned, older Americans reportedly lost $1.6 billion to frauds and scams in 2022. And as you also mentioned, this number is undoubtedly lower than the actual figure because many seniors, for a variety of reasons, including embarrassment or shame, fail to report the scams perpetrated against them. The FTC estimates in 2022 the actual amount lost by seniors could be as high as $48.4 billion. And now with artificial intelligence, the scams are getting worse. AI has become a sophisticated weapon that can be effectively utilized by even the most unsophisticated scammers. And today I'd like to tell you about a few of the scams in which AI is being used and how we can protect older adults. By now, as you heard, many people are somewhat familiar with the family emergency scam or grandparent scam, in which a family member receives a telephone call from someone posing as their loved one. The individual on the phone claims to have gotten into some trouble, most commonly a traffic accident. In grandparent scams, the scammer pleads for the grandparent to send the money immediately to help resolve the problem and begs the grandparent not to tell mom and dad. Now, this scam has been perpetrated for approximately 14 years, but it is getting worse, and we have AI to thank for that. Through the use of readily available AI voice cloning technology, a scammer using a recording of the grandchild or child's voice obtained from YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, or voicemail can create a call to the grandparent that sounds exactly like the grandchild. All it takes is AI voice generating software readily available and as little as 30 seconds of audio. Phishing emails, and the more specifically targeted spear phishing emails, use social engineering to lure the targeted victim to click on a link, download a malware attachment, make a payment, or provide personal information. Spear phishing, however, is a personalized phishing email that incorporates information about the targeted victim to make that email more believable. And phishing is used in a variety of schemes. In 2021, Google conducted a study in conjunction with researchers at Stanford. The researchers studied more than 1 billion malicious emails targeting Gmail users. And they found that the number of phishing and spear phishing emails users received totaled more than 100 million each day. Again, as bad as a threat as socially engineered spear phishing emails are presented in the past, they are far worse now because of AI. Using AI, scammers can create more sophisticated and effective spear phishing emails that are more likely to convince a victim to fall for a scam. In the past, phishing emails, particularly those originating overseas in countries where English is not the primary language, could be recognized by their lack of grammar, syntax, or spelling. However, AI has solved those problems for foreign scammers, and their phishing emails are now more difficult to recognize. So how do we protect seniors from scams? Well, forewarned is forearmed. Alerting the public as to telltale signs of scams and how to recognize them is a key element in protecting seniors. I do this each day through Scamicide, And this committee has also done this through publications such as its fraud book publication, which contains much useful information. Fortunately, AI can also be an effective tool in combating AI-enhanced scams. Machine learning algorithms can analyze vast amounts of data to identify patterns and trends associated with spear phishing emails. AI can also be used to identify robocall patterns and detect spoofing, a technique used to manipulate caller ID and mimic another phone number. Regulation of AI is critical to protecting people from AI-enhanced scams. And as was said, the President's recent executive order is a promising first step. The FTC has regulatory authority over AI through Section 5 of the FTC Act, but Congress will also have a role to play in crafting appropriate regulations. Unfortunately, scammers may pay little attention to regulators, so regulators should focus on ensuring consumers can identify and authenticate content. When it comes to protecting seniors from the daunting challenge of AI-enhanced scams, the time to do the best we can is now.
Thank you, Mr. Weissman. Dr. Eken. Did I pronounce that correctly, Eken?
You did. Thank you, Chairman
Okay,
Casey
thank you.
and Ranking Member Braun. Today, as we convene, it's alarming to acknowledge an 81% increase in losses to scams among older Americans, accounting to billions of dollars in the past year. I'm Tahir Eken, field chair in business analytics and a professor at McCoy College of Business, Texas State University. My research delves into the critical intersection of AI and fraud detection. I'm honored to testify on this urgent matter today. Scams continue to affect older Americans at alarming rates. Despite improved awareness and educational campaigns, both the losses and the number of victims has surged. This prompts the question, are scammers becoming more sophisticated or are responses lagging? The reality likely involves a combination of both. AI amplifies the impact of scams, enhancing their believability and emotional appeal through personalization. Voice and face manipulation elicit urgency and familiarity, manipulating older adults' emotional responses and vulnerability. Notably, there is a surge in personalized scams. Recognizing the growing role of AI in scams is crucial. While efforts to halt scammers are underway, we should also explore AI as part of the solution. My research centered on AI methods for healthcare fraud detection draws parallels to combating scams targeting older Americans. Industries like credit card companies have successfully used AI for fraud detection, denying suspicious transactions in almost real time and collaborating with consumers for confirmation. However, healthcare fraud still incurs substantial losses as high as 10% of our annual health expenditures, which could mean more than $300 billion. Hence the name of my book, Statistics and Healthcare Fraud, How to Save Billions. We have limited resources to analyze billions of transactions. Statistics and AI find the needles in the haystack to support the auditors and save taxpayers' money. AI's proactive role extends to monitoring online platforms and blocking potential scam calls. Yet, its true potential lies in collaboration, as seen in government healthcare programs. Initiatives like the Medicare Transaction Fraud Prevention Act that advocate data collection and co-verification with beneficiaries are essential for AI integration, akin to credit card fraud detection. Responsible AI methods can facilitate personalized education campaigns while preserving privacy and ethics. For example, AI can flag atypical behavioral patterns like sudden financial transactions, enabling tailored alerts and educational materials for older adults. Lastly, fraudsters are adaptive, and scams will evolve. Use of adversarial AI can help proactively limit scammers' abilities. Acknowledging AI's imperfections, such as false positives, and addressing privacy concerns is crucial. However, by constructing responsible AI systems, we can empower older Americans while navigating potential risks. To effectively combat these evolving threats, collaboration among government agencies, tech companies, financial institutions, and consumer advocacy groups is crucial. Sharing insights and data to train these AI models to detect and prevent these scams is pivotal. Including input from older adults in developing AI-driven tools is also necessary. In the fight against AI-driven scams, awareness and AI literacy are critical weapons. Existing efforts, such as the Pass It On campaign, can be enhanced to include AI-related scams. In the context of ethical use of AI against scams, clear disclosure of the use of AI in communication, marketing, and financial transactions with a focus on protecting vulnerable populations is important. Accessible support and reporting mechanisms, such as the toll-free fraud hotline, are crucial against scams. AI-based chatbots and communication channels can supplement and provide additional support outside the business hours and at the time of need. AI also can make public scam campaigns more impactful, making them tailored to the needs of specific older adult groups. In conclusion, the interplay of AI and scams brings forth challenges and opportunities. Striking a careful balance between fostering AI innovation and protecting vulnerable populations is paramount. I advocate for proactive and personalized AI-based supporting measures, recognizing the difficulty in recovering both lost finances and mental well-being after a scam has occurred. By prioritizing the enhancement of their data and AI literacy, we can also actively involve older Americans in prevention and detection. Understanding the impacts of dynamic disruptions like AI will undoubtedly take time. As a realistic optimist, I find hope in the collaborative efforts to yield robust and trustworthy AI applications, fostering a safer environment for older adults. Thank you for providing this platform to address this critical issue. Your work in safeguarding older Americans against scams and raising awareness is commendable. I eagerly welcome any questions or discussions the committee may have. Thank you.
Doctor, thank you very much. We'll now move to our questions of the witnesses. And just for folks' awareness, today is Thursday, so we have senators in and out coming from other hearings and other commitments. So we should have some senators here around 10:45, but it'll be about the time that Senator Braun and I are probably through our first round of questions. But I'll start with Gary Schildhorn. Gary, thanks again for sharing your experience. And we know that when it comes to these scams, these bad actors, or a better way to refer to them as criminals, will prey upon our vulnerabilities and our fear. They know we're human beings. They know they can advance their scam by playing on those fears and those vulnerabilities. With artificial intelligence, scammers can more easily and quickly and accurately tailor or target their scams to intended victims. The committee offers resources, including the fraud book, which I mentioned earlier, that share some red flags to watch out for and steps to take to prevent against scams. We're also releasing a brochure, which I have here, that will provide more information in a shorter form. But Gary, I wanted to ask you this: what do you think people should know about AI-assisted scams? Number one, what should they know, and how should they identify them? What are some of the red flags or indicators that you've learned since you were the target of this?
Thank you for the question. It's very difficult now to see red flags. The person that I spoke with, Barry Goldstein, spoke coherent, intelligent English. There were no grammatical errors or mispronunciation of words. His text messages back and forth were clear and responsive. When I was engaging him while I was trying to get law enforcement in, I told him that I was trying to find his name in Martindale Hubble, and for lawyers, that's where lawyer biographies are found. He sent me a biography that he had already had ready. So it's very difficult for you to see a sign that it is a scam. There is one way that I recognize as a red flag. When someone is asking you to send money either by cash or by gift cards or other untraceable methods, that's the red flag. That's when an antenna should go up and say, well, why aren't they just asking me to do a regular wire transfer from my bank to their bank? So in answer to your question, that is the main red flag that I see that a consumer could react to as a possible indication of a scam.
Yeah, I know that over the years, and among other things that our fraud book has talked about, is just in the context of certain kinds of scams that there are red flags, and I understand what you're saying. They're a lot harder to detect. For example, we used to say that, and it's still the case, that with these IRS scams that are somewhat related to what we're talking about, but now of greater sophistication. But one rule was, if someone calls you and says they're from the IRS on the telephone, it's your first contact, it's not the IRS. You'll always get something in writing. But I realize that's a rather simple rule, much harder to find the simple red flags with the sophistication of AI. Mr. Weissman, I know you've got a website, Scamicide, which features a tremendous amount of information about scams. You've been doing this for about 12 years, a scam of the day. And it's hard to believe you have that much content, but that tells you the gravity of the problem or the scope of it. Your work demonstrates how pervasive and persistent scammers are and how diverse their tactics are when targeting witnesses. This committee has been collecting data on scams targeting older adults for about 10 years now. We've seen trends that change and new technologies that emerge. And obviously some of those are set forth in the fraud book. But in the time that you've been running and operating the website, how have you seen technology change and tactics shift? And maybe what's your advice for us as we look forward down the road, especially with the advent of AI?
You mentioned when I started Scamicide, I wondered if I would have enough scams to do a new one every day. And after more than 4,400 scams, unfortunately, they don't stop. You know, the scams have been with us forever. The Nigerian email is just an update of a scam called the Spanish prisoner from the 1500s. And the cryptocurrency scams we see, even cryptocurrency pump and dumps, were done before. But you're right, the technology has changed it. It's changed it, the delivery systems, as far as robocalls. It's done it, the voice over internet protocol, where phones can be, messages can come in from all over the world over a computer. And the phone is still the way that seniors get the most scammed. And then there's even something called spoofing. So you mentioned the IRS, and you know it's not the IRS, which is the same line I've always told people. However, they look at their caller ID and they see the call is coming from the IRS, and so they trust it. And that's where my motto comes in, is trust me, you can't trust anyone. And AI has just enhanced that. And sort of what Tom was saying, anytime you are asked for personal information, anytime you are asked to make a payment of any kind, anytime you're asked to click on a link, you've got to be skeptical. You've got to hold back and check it out. But it's a nice rule that can be very difficult when these scammers, these scam artists, the only criminals we call artists, have a knowledge of psychology Freud would have envied, and they're able to manipulate us, and that's where we need to change our minds.
Thanks very much. Ranking Member Braun?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schildhorn, how did the story end with Barry Goldstein? I see where he actually got mad at you at the tail end. Was anybody ever able to track this guy down, or is he still out there?
Ranking Member Braun, it ended when I asked him for his Social Security number.
Yeah.
And he told me, he actually cursed me out, told me I didn't love my son, and stopped communicating with me at that point. So that's how it ended. What was the second part of your question?
So, in other words, he got frustrated, and then he just disappeared into the ether then?
He recognized that. But is he still out there? Yes. And I know that because the calls I got when people found my article were telling me that it was Mr. Goldstein.
So he's still using the
It-
same
it-
name?
It works. Why not? And when the reporter reached out to him, it was pretty incredible because the reporter said, "You're in California. How did you meet with Brett Schildhorn in Philadelphia?" "Oh, well, it was a phone meeting." I mean, he had answers for everything. But yes, as far as I know, from the calls I've received, that scam is unabated. It still goes on. And no one has.
And the traceability of using a phone or whatever he does has never led authorities to Mr. Goldstein.
When I first contacted the FBI, they said, well, they use burner phones, which cannot be traced, and the cryptocurrency cannot be recalled. And at that time, I'm not even sure they could find the accounts that cryptocurrency went on. This was 2020. So law enforcement had no solution. As I said in my testimony, it's fundamental in our system that if you're harmed, you have a remedy. And here, there seemed to be no remedy, neither the courts of law or law enforcement.
And he's not the only one. Thank you for
Sure.
explaining that thoroughly. Question for Mr. Romanoff. When you look at how AI has been used in terms of credit card companies, healthcare, we know, and we've seen some real graphic examples of how it's used maliciously. Can you go over a few of the things that we know it's worked at and saved time and money?
Yeah, so the sheer amount of information and data that needs to be processed in order to protect systems against cyber crime and hacking is a human can't do it. And so there's algorithms that have existed for many years now. AI has been used to assist cyber defenders for years in terms of processing that information, identifying trends, and flagging anything that could be fraudulent in that space. That continues to be a major factor in terms of defending against some of these attacks. And in terms of some of the expended capacity of being able to detect whether a phone call is actually coming from the right person or identifying trends in robocalling and things like that, AI can be very useful in assisting in that, which does tend to stem some of the scams that are being perpetuated. In terms of direct correlation between what the credit card companies and this application, there are some obstacles there. You have to have the credit card company or financial institution involved in order to identify a fraud or scam. And so when it's happening at an individual level, there is some question as to who steps in and uses these powerful systems to identify that.
So in your opinion then, for the bill that we're introducing, I think I'm going to get co-leads on the other side of the aisle, the Medicare Transaction Fraud Prevention Act, which is aimed at diagnostic, testing, and durable medical equipment. Is there any reason the principles of what you just described wouldn't work to prevent fraud there, through CMS?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that there's different data regulations in terms of HIPAA versus consumer data and protections on that front. I would have to read the bill in order to provide specific insights on that. But in terms of the systems of AI being used to identify fraud, you can see an application there in the application of healthcare in general. Yes.
That amount, by the way, is $60 billion a year.
Oh, yeah.
Defrauding Medicare. It's a lot. I got another question. Do you want to yield back? And
Go ahead.
okay. This is for Dr. Eken. We just described what's happening in our own government, and like when we did the extended unemployment benefits, which was just under $1 trillion, and there's an estimate that anywhere from 100 to 200 billion from domestic and foreign fraudsters. And when the government's involved, it's like, it's a lot easier seemingly to defraud. I've never heard commercial entities, they've got all this protective gear. Here, it's like picking it out of a toddler's hand almost. So what can we do here, and let's just look at CMS's current Medicare fraud prevention system, compare it to what could be out there, and is it any different from what it was years ago?
Thank you, Senator Braun, for the question. There have been many improvements. Actually, in 2011, since 2011, now CMS has authority to use predictive algorithms to identify fraud. And they have come up with this fraud prevention system. And now we have the second installment of that. And over time, they have been using some both prepayment and post-payment methods to detect fraud. But most of the focus has been on post-payment, which basically focuses on more pay and chase transactions. So the basically system pays the providers, including fraudsters, and then try to chase the potential the funds from the fraudulent transactions, which we are not as successful. We are not able to recover as much. So recently, with the second installment of the fraud prevention system, they also added prepayment edits, but they mostly focus on eligibility of billings with respect to the policies and rules of Medicare.
So is the amount of $60 billion a year going down, or is it still going up?
I believe it's still going up because our also annual healthcare expenditures have been going up, right? In the especially last decade. So most of the government agencies put the overall loss around 3 to 10%. Given that we are spending more than $4 trillion on healthcare, the amount is easily in dozens of billions.
That's all in the context currently. We're borrowing $1 trillion every 6 months to run this business here. And when you've got that kind of fraud nipping at its flanks, something's got to give. Yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Braun. We're now joined by Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this hearing on artificial intelligence, which is growing in importance and gaining public attention at an accelerating rate, almost as fast an accelerating rate as artificial intelligence itself is progressing. And as you know, we've done a lot here in the Senate. Majority Leader Schumer has held a number of forums. The subcommittee that I had, a subcommittee of the Judiciary called Privacy, Technology, and the Law, has held a number of hearings as well. Ours have been public. At one of them, matter of fact, the first, I played a recording of my voice and introduced it by saying, now for some introductory remarks. It was my voice, but it was taken from speeches that I gave on the floor of the Senate. And the content of what was said came from ChatGPT. One of the witnesses at the hearing was Sam Altman of OpenAI. And it was literally my voice, content that could have easily been mistaken for something I said. It sounded exactly like what the chairman of a subcommittee would have said, and it sounded exactly like my voice, which leads to one of the areas that I think all of you have mentioned, particularly Mr. Romanoff, the impersonation and deepfake dangers. You mentioned in your testimony that some banks now use voice identification to authenticate account ownership because some of the scammers are using voice impersonation in effect to break the authentication that the banks try to use. Can you talk a little bit about how multiple authentication which you mentioned in your testimony, can help prevent these kind of scams, and whether they would have any application to the individual senior citizen who gets a call. Sounds exactly like that person's nephew. I'm stranded here in Topeka, and I have no money. Please wire money. You know, the standard fraud, but the impersonation of the voice is used to trick, might be anyone, not just a senior citizen, but can you talk a little bit about authentication as a means of breaking the potential impersonation scams?
Sure thing. So in terms of voice cloning, it's a technology that's been around for a little bit. 1998 was the first time someone cloned their voice using a computer. But with generative AI, as we're all aware, there's been much more capacity and much more availability to access these voice cloning tools. And at the same time, banks are, want to provide services to their customers with an ease of use while protecting their assets. And so for a little while, voice banking was something that you could use the biometric markers of a person's voice in order to authenticate them as a user. It was very recently that a reporter was able to break into their own account using voice banking and demonstrate that this technology is advanced to a point where it may not be essentially viable in terms of authenticating a user. And so in cybersecurity, you're supposed to have multi-factor authentication at all times. It does create obstacles to access some of your assets or information or whatever it might be, because the ease of use in terms of doing more than one way to authenticate, it can cause people to not want to do that service or whatever it might be. But it's necessary because no longer are voice biometrics enough to authenticate a user. And so you're seeing banks move away from that or shy away from voice authentication as a way to verify. And the second thing is behavioral. When it comes to cyber hygiene, we tend to engage our products or services in a way that is familiar to us. And so if you introduce a behavior such as using your voice to authenticate your bank account, then folks that get used to that will expect that. And scammers know that. So they will look for ways that they can capitalize on established behaviors such as voice cloning and voice authentication to access assets. And so the second thing is to, as Chairman Casey mentioned, if IRS is calling you and it's the first time you're hearing from them, then that's a red flag. It should also be a red flag if your bank is calling you, because there should be more than one way to authenticate that the bank is the one that's calling you in that space. Now, I think the main obstacle here is that you're dealing with an institution when it comes to banks and trying to authenticate versus you're dealing with a psychological attack in the case of these scams, where the emphasis is on action. And so what I encourage folks to do, and this is a very low-tech way of addressing the issue, is doing a password among your friends and family and making sure that you're not publicizing that password or putting it in an email, because hackers will be able to get access to that. But if somebody were to call you, you can say password authenticate, and if they aren't able to do that, then you're probably dealing with somebody who's cloning the voice. That's a very low-key way of doing it. When it comes to institutional approaches, a multi-factor authentication is probably the best bet going forward.
And how about the individual, living at home? Is there a way, and will there be ways, I assume this technology is also developing the authentication, multiple factor technology, for me sitting in my living room getting a call from one of my children, sounds exactly like one of my children, saying, I can't talk. I'm here at, a bus terminal or a train station. I need money. Please wire it. A lot of people fall for that kind of scam.
Yeah. So I'm aware of some use cases where private sector is using AI and technology to try to cut down on robocalling, and it's using some of the technology to authenticate a user that's coming in. I'm not sure if that product or those products are being applied to authenticate voices per se, so I can't answer if there's a specific product or process out there for that.
Thank you. Thank you to all the witnesses who are here today. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Blumenthal. We'll turn next to Senator Warren.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Braun, for holding this hearing. Thank you all for being here. Really important topic. So crypto is a favorite for those who are looking to defraud consumers. According to the FBI, in 2022, crypto scams were the leading cause of investment fraud in the United States. Using crypto, fraudsters stole a record $2.5 billion from consumers. But crypto fraud isn't hitting all consumers equally. Last year, we saw a 350% increase in crypto investment scams targeting seniors. That is the biggest spike among all age groups. That added up to more than $1 billion that seniors lost in crypto scams. And because many victims don't report their experiences, as some of you have noted, out of shame or fear, that $1 billion figure is almost surely an underestimate. Now, Mr. Weissman, you are a nationally recognized expert on scams and cybersecurity. Why are older Americans particularly vulnerable to crypto scams?
You know, it's older Americans are, they're susceptible generally because there's a part of our, anecdotally we say, well, we've lost a little bit off the fastball, which I can attribute to it. It's not going as far. But there's a part of our brain dealing with skepticism that becomes less viable as we age. And there have been studies done at Cornell as well as the University of Iowa that have shown this. Then you get into the issue of cryptocurrencies itself, and there's this fear of missing out, and it's, oh my goodness, this is going to be the best thing since the proverbial sliced bread. So the seniors are susceptible to this, but it's even worse than that, Senator Warren, in the sense that when a scammer will scam someone with a cryptocurrency scam, and there are myriads of them, from phony cryptos to using it as the funds that are in various other kinds of investment scams, they become scammed, and then they give the list of the scammers do, of their victims, to other scammers who will contact the victims and say, we're from the federal government, we're from the Justice Department, and for a fee, apparently the Justice Department now charges fees, we will collect for you. And they lose again. So fear and greed are two elements that are found in every kind of scam, and unfortunately, crypto just has captured the imagination of many people, particularly seniors, and it's coming back to bite us.
Wow. Well, I really appreciate your work on this. You know, as you said, crypto is used in all kinds of scams. Scammers claim to have embarrassing information about someone they will reveal unless the person forks over a crypto ransom. Scammers pose as friends and loved ones to encourage people to invest their life savings so long as the payment is in crypto. And we now understand that scammers even set up fake investment platforms to trick people into buying crypto that, of course, they will never be able to get their money out of. I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Weissman.
No, it's funny because I think you're aware, my favorite was on YouTube, there was an investment scam that was going to couple cryptocurrencies and AI. AI is going to show you how to make and guaranteed millions from crypto. And the CEO of the company was there touting it. The CEO wasn't real. He was an AI-generated avatar. And anyone that put money into this thing lost it. So, yeah, it's scary, the combination of AI and crypto. And with the anonymity of crypto, that's why the scammers love it so much.
Right. Well, so talk for just a sec. Why crypto? Why is it happening through crypto rather than, say, your bank account or some other transaction account?
It's the new shiny object that's catching our mind, and we think that there is something there. I can't help believe that to a certain extent it is the emperor's new clothes. Cryptocurrencies are legitimate, but the idea as making millions in investments on this.
So it's the new shiny object. Anything else about crypto? The
Well,
anonymity?
The anonymity is terrific, and that's one thing. You have people looking for the privacy, and of course that's something with crypto mixers, where your account gets mixed in with others and becomes very difficult to trace. One of the things the government did a great job was after the ransomware attack with Colonial Pipeline, they were able to trace those accounts and get it back. But once it goes into the mixers, then you've got problems. Now, there's legitimate privacy concerns some people may have, but it doesn't come anywhere near to the scammers.
Right. And it also, as I understand it, is fast. So
Extreme.
the money is gone.
And that's the thing. You react in scams, it's often, you got to act now, it's an emergency, we act immediately. And then I've actually had clients who have been scammed with a credit card fraud and managed to call and stop it. That isn't happening with crypto.
Yeah, and can. Yeah. So, look, I think that Americans are getting sick and tired of these crypto crimes, and it's long past time that we get some regulation in place to deal with this. And that's why Senator Roger Marshall and I have introduced our bipartisan Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act. This bill has the support of 14 other senators, both Democrats and Republicans, and the chair of our committee here. It is endorsed by the AARP. It would make it easier for financial regulators to track suspicious crypto activity and shut down scammers. So I know I'm over time, but so let's do this one. Maybe we can do it as a yes, no. Mr. Wiseman, would crypto legislation like ours help cut down on crypto scams?
Yes, absolutely. I love it. And here's the thing. My students at Bentley University were recently studying money laundering, and we were talking about this very thing. The law is always behind technology. The banks have the know your customer rule, which helps. You need to have the private sector and the government working together. Your legislation is long overdue. It's a no-brainer in the sense, not that you're no-brainer.
No, I take that as a compliment.
Okay, but it is something that absolutely would help immeasurably.
Good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We've got no time to waste on this. These scams are happening every day. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you for the video that you showed at the top of the hearing that told the story of Jennifer DeStefano. Jennifer is a mom of 4 from Scottsdale. And as I think we heard earlier this year, she got a call from an unknown number. And when she picked it up, it was her 15-year-old daughter. Her daughter was crying and calling out for her. A man got on the phone and threatened to harm her kid unless she paid $50,000. The man said he needed the money in cash and would be coming to her in a van. And folks nearby called 911 as well as calling Jennifer's husband. Turned out that her daughter was just at home, not with kidnappers. And the call wasn't real. Scammers had used, in this case, AI to create a voice that sounded like her daughter's voice, and she couldn't tell the difference. And even though in that moment of extreme, horrific, terror probably shook Jennifer to her core, the police said there was nothing that they could do. No money was transferred. No crime, they said, had been committed. Now, this feels to me, and I imagine many others, and to many Americans, as a huge blind spot in the law. I think we have a couple lawyers on the panel here, so for Mr. Schildhorn and Mr. Wiseman, how should we in Congress be looking at filling these gaps in the law?
Thank you, Senator. As I think you've just mentioned it as part of your question, it is a fundamental principle of our system that there is a remedy if you're harmed. And with crypto and AI, the law enforcement does not have a remedy, and neither does the judicial system. You can't find anyone to sue. So my answer is that there needs to be some legislation that allows these people to be identified, or where the money has gone to be identified, so that there's a remedy for the harm that's being caused. Currently, there's a hole in the system. There is no remedy that I'm aware of.
Well, how about of the issue that in this specific case, and by the way, I've had this, this happened to somebody I'm rather close with, almost the exact same thing. And again, no money was transferred. But it was incredibly, shocking to, in this case, it was a grandparent that had the same issue, same thing happened to them with a grandkid. No money was transferred. To me, that still seems like a crime, attempting to rip somebody off, even though they weren't successful. Do you feel we should make that a crime and their criminal penalties?
Well, Senator Kelly, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm a lawyer, so that's never stopped me from giving an opinion. So in this instance, I mean, there are analogies in the law to intentional infliction of emotional distress. I believe that's a cause of action in many states. So there might be a way to enhance that type of law, that if someone's using this, even if you don't spend money and you cause that kind of shock and distress, that the law allows you to recover a sum of money that's not calculated by how much you've actually lost, but how much pain and suffering you've incurred because you've been subject to that type of extortion.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Wiseman?
Yeah, and I think Gary hit on the key word there. Extortion is a crime. Attempted extortion is a crime. I do think it already is a criminal violation, but I agree with you. I think that some federal legislation to this particular medium of delivery of this extortion could be done. The other thing is, one thing I tell my students when we're talking about white-collar crime, the answer to every question is, it's about the money. And so here, as has been said before, it's very difficult to trace it. They're using burner phones. Who knows even where they may be? They may be even using voice cloning technology. They can be in a foreign country where their accents are no longer going to be able to be heard. But what we can do is, as the Senior Safe Act is, go after gift cards because they pay by gift cards. Go after the wiring. Go after the banking. So you stop it there where people, they're in the rush of emotion. Then they go to pay by a gift card, and the gift card people say, where's this going? What's this for? And they recognize the scam. So stop it before it actually occurs.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to submit a couple questions for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. We'll turn next to Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you so much for being here. I, like many of the senators here, have heard so many reports about how our seniors are being targeted with financial fraud, financial scams, AI-generated scams, cryptocurrency-related scams. It is unbelievable the amount that criminal networks, worldwide criminal networks, are targeting our older Americans. They have retirement funds, they have life savings, and these times are very complex, and these scams are getting more and more sophisticated. And so, unfortunately, our older Americans are soft targets for these very, very sophisticated criminal networks. Let's address AI. Scammers can use AI-generated and powered technology to do deepfakes on voice, do deepfakes on photographs. We know of a New Yorker whose mother received a call from a scammer using voice cloning AI to mimic her distressed child and needed $15,000 to get her out of jail. Unfortunately, that scam worked. Mr. Romanoff, are the technology development practices in applying AI that also protect consumers from fraud? Are there any unintended consequences of using AI for this purpose? And do you believe that the existing federal agencies are properly equipped, both in their technical capability and congressional appropriations, to combat these targeted scams?
Thank you for that question. I'll start with the latter question. So some federal agencies that are more geared towards law enforcement would be better equipped to deal with these scams. I do think that generative AI, in terms of its use to perpetuate fraud, goes across multiple jurisdictions. And so there is a need to increase the AI readiness in the workforce of AI in the federal government, the folks that can identify these issues and use AI itself to detect the fraud. In terms of your first question, and please repeat, what was it? I'm sorry.
It was, well, you already answered it, if you can use AI for good and bad in this scenario. And the second was, do the federal agencies have enough law enforcement power to actually address the problem?
Yeah, so in both of those scenarios, yes, you can use it for good and bad. I think the consideration around AI and its use to detect fraud is, there's a growing concern right now that, do you invest in the AI systems to detect fraud, or do you invest in the workforce, individuals who have the expertise to identify trends themselves? I think as technology continues to be kind of expand and adopted, we're going to look at a gap between the folks that are entry-level kind of law enforcement folks and the folks that are looking at these systems long-term. So there needs to be some sort of consideration around, how do you train individuals beyond using AI to identify these issues? Because data has a deteriorating value over time. So these AI models that are used to detect fraud and trained to detect fraud, they need a constant source of data and updates in order to figure out what the latest trend is on that. And so...
Thank you. I only have a minute. I got to do another question. The second question I have is about cryptocurrency. We've seen the lack of regulation in cryptocurrency being an impediment to protecting consumers. And I'm very frustrated that the Senate has not held substantial hearings yet on how we can actually provide common sense, thoughtful regulation to keep good actors in the United States and to have law enforcement tools to ban bad actors. We have an example where our Attorney General filed a claim against a cryptocurrency company defrauding hundreds of thousands of investors. But one older woman, for example, a retired 73-year-old grandmother, invested her husband's life savings of $200,000 in a scam cryptocurrency company. We need companies to register with the SEC, with the CFTC, with the IRS. We need oversight by the Fed. We need oversight by all the regulatory organizations, and Congress isn't doing that work. The second thing is, I've also heard of scams where seniors are being asked to send money urgently because there's some bank account problem, and they're asked to send it at a cryptocurrency ATM. So even the low-tech version of fraud is being used to mislead seniors into thinking that that is a way to fix a banking problem. So, Mr. Weissman, I lead a bill, the Senior Financial Empowerment Act, which would ensure older adults and their caregivers have access to critical information regarding how to report and combat fraud. How would consumer education have helped in this situation? And Mr. Schildhorn, thank you for sharing your experience. You mentioned that you were asked to wire funds. How can crypto be used as a tool for scammers? And what do you believe could be done on the institution and consumer education end to prevent those type of scams? So both, please.
Yeah, I was a big fan of your bill, particularly the areas of consumer education, which are so critical. But the scammers create an emergency and people respond, and emotionally. The thing I found the most interesting was your reference to the ATMs and the cryptocurrency ATMs. They are just the easy access road to sending money to the scammers, and they're unregulated. So as I said earlier, the law is always going to be behind technology, but the kind of regulations you're asking for are eminently reasonable, and these are the kinds of things we have in other areas of the economy. So this is what we should be doing.
Senator Gildebrand, on an institutional level, I look at the banks because there is one break where the scammer does not have the direct relationship with the victim, and that's at the teller. So right now you can't withdraw $9,000 from an ATM. You must have a human interaction with a teller. If banks are required to train their tellers to ask questions when they see an unusual cash withdrawal, that's an institutional change that might prevent scam. On the individual basis, I think Mr. Romanoff talked about having a family password, but there's another way to do it as well, by asking a question that only your relative or your child would know. For example, if I asked who I thought was my son Brett, what's your brother's middle name? I mean, as soon as you ask that question, there's unlikely to be an answer. But to have consumers think of that while their child is hurt in jail is a lot to ask, because it's the emotional part of your brain that's controlling everything you're doing. The rational part of your brain is suppressed during this. But the teller possibility is there.
Thank you all for testifying today. This is an urgent crisis in my state of New York, and your leadership and your advocacy is making a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. I'll turn next to Ranking Member Braun.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have one final question. The Medicare Transaction Fraud Prevention Act, which we're rolling out, is to empower CMS to use this tool to catch fraudsters. I can't believe it currently that they do not, and this is for Dr. Eken, they do not use beneficiary feedback. And this bill would allow that too. What do we lose to actually learn from it when we're not talking to the people that actually get defrauded?
Thank you, Senator Braun, for the question. Actually, one of the major things we are missing is our algorithms are not adaptive enough because we are not getting the data feedback from the beneficiaries. And if we are able to get that data, even our existing predictive algorithms would be more accurate. And basically, they would be adapt to the real scams in a almost more real-time fashion. So I think that's what we are missing out.
Well, I think, thank you for that answer, and I believe getting beneficiary feedback along with being able to use the latest tools, most other places that do well with preventing fraud are already doing both. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Braun, and I'll just have maybe one more question before we wrap up. I wanted to turn to Mr. Romanoff. You've spoken about how quickly generative AI's use by the public exploded, and it seems we're dealing today with an entirely different landscape than we were even a year ago. And I don't think it'd be surprising to anyone here to see even newer technology emerge in the coming year or years that will change it yet again. So I wanted to ask you, can you discuss some of the ways you think AI will be used by both scammers and these criminals in the future to prey on consumers, and what should companies be doing now, right now, to protect their consumers and to protect their data?
Yes, so I want to start by saying oftentimes the quote around how much time it takes to clone a voice, around 3 seconds, that data came from 2020. And so when we think about generative AI and its current hype cycle, this technology has already existed in the wild for many years now. There's the darknet out there in which there are scammers that are using packaged goods to scam adults, older adults and youngsters as well. That's always going to be an issue, but in terms of opportunists, you can address that by watermarking content that is generated by an AI. The problem with that is that there is always a cat and mouse or a spy versus spy in terms of identifying that generative AI. And so what we'll see is continued adoption of some of these established scams into kind of the new world of being able to generate content at will. And then probably new scams will emerge over time. And companies can do a lot by, doing some of the volunteer standards that, the Biden administration came out with some around watermarking and continuing to do some digital work there to make sure that you can run checks against whether something is generated by an AI versus not. And the other area that I've mentioned in my testimony is multi-factor authentication. We're going to need to get better at confirming that a caller or an image or a voice is actually coming from the originator.
Thanks very much. I know we're out of time, and I wish we had more time. We have lots more questions, but this panel was very informative for us. I'm going to go through an closing statement, but I did also want to note for the record, Senator Rick Scott was here, was not able to ask a question, but was here for the hearing. And as you might know, Thursdays in the Senate are busy mornings Today was a little different because we ended our voting for this work period last night, so a lot of schedules changed. So that's why people are in and out, and some weren't able to make it, but we're grateful. The hearing record, of course, will be available to all senators. But I want to start by thanking those who are here today, and especially our witnesses, for providing us information, and by virtue of this hearing, giving this information to people across the country. And hearing, in this case, not just from witnesses, but in some cases, people who live through some of these scams, impacted by highly convincing versions of family emergency scams, including Gary Schildhorn that we heard from first. We also heard from Mr. Wiseman, who spoke broadly about how scams, themselves, and also how he has seen them evolve over his 12 years of operating Scamicide and posting a scam of the day. And as you said, Mr. Wiseman, never running out of material, unfortunately. Mr. Romanov elaborated more on the rapid growth and evolution of artificial intelligence and how this technology enables scammers to deploy scams quickly and cheaply, and how AI is the perfect tool to deceive even the most skeptical consumer. Dr. Eken shared some of his research on fraud in the healthcare space, and we're grateful for that. And it's clear that federal action is needed. You heard that from some of our colleagues. The action is needed to put up guardrails to protect consumers from AI, while also empowering those that can use it for good. And yet we need to be cautious of bias in AI. Algorithms, just like humans, need to be trained not to discriminate. So I look forward to moving this conversation forward with my partners in the Senate on this and on this committee. To that end, I, along with members of the committee, will be sending a letter to the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, asking that the agency appropriately track AI use in scams in its fraud and scams database. For those watching this hearing today, I wanted to emphasize that the committee is here as a resource, whether you just want to learn more or whether you've been targeted by a scam or you have questions about a potential scam. You can access our new resources, including the committee's newest fraud book, with information, tips, and resources, our brochure on the threat of AI and scams, and a helpful bookmark that with quick tips online via the Aging Committee website. So to get to that information, it's aging.senate.gov. And if you receive a call, a text, an email, or social media message, and something seems off, and you're skeptical, as we all should be, unfortunately, even more and more skeptical, you can report this to the Aging Committee's fraud hotline, and I'll read this number twice. It's 1-855-303-9470. That's 1-855-303-9470. Aging Committee staff are available to answer your calls Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can also watch the video clip that we played at the beginning of the hearing and full clips from all of those individuals impacted on our website. I also want to just note for the record, so every year we have this fraud book, but we don't always highlight the top 10 scams. I'm just going to read them into the record so it's clear to people. These are the top 10 scams for the calendar year 2022. Number 1, financial services impersonation and fraud. Number 2, healthcare and health insurance scams. Number 3, robocalls and unsolicited calls. Number 4, text scams and computer scams. Number 5, romance scams. Number 6, government imposter scams, like the IRS that we noted earlier. Number 7, sweepstake and lottery scams. Number 8, identity theft. Number 9, business impersonation and shopping scams. And number 10, person in need and grandparent scams that we just heard about. And also note for the record that at the beginning of the fraud book, starting on pages 8 and 9, it's fashioned as an alert: use of artificial intelligence in scams. So you have a couple pages just on the AI threat, and that's, of course, new information for so many people. So we appreciate folks reviewing that. But I do want to urge all consumers, no matter what their age, young, old, or somewhere in between, to review our website, access our educational resources, watch the full video stories from our participants, which will be longer than the clips. And I also want to note for the record that Ranking Member Braun will be submitting a closing statement for the record. And again, thank you again to all of our witnesses for contributing both their time and their expertise to this topic. If any senators have additional questions for the witnesses or statements to be added to the hearing record, the record will be open until Monday, November 27th. So thank you all for participating today, and this will conclude our hearing.